Using colored epoxy in woodworking projects is all the rage today, and for good reason. You can really create some stunning projects with it. And this little table is a great example. The basic concept for pouring epoxy resin, like this product from TimberCast, is pretty simple. Just fill in the voids in an interesting piece of lumber like this with your colored epoxy. But there are a couple of considerations to have, both in terms of design and your pocketbook to think about before you start. With a board like this, I have a couple of options. I could just fill in these voids and these cracks on either end and on the top right here and call it good. That would leave this interesting shape open. Or I can build a form all the way around the board, a mold if you will, and then fill in all of these areas with colored epoxy. And that's what I'm choosing to do. But as you see, with the way these edges of the board continue back and in, that means a lot of resin would be needed to fill in that space. So to reduce the amount of epoxy needed, I'm going to add some material to the bottom of the table, but do it in such a way that it will not be seen. I'm going to use this jig to guide my router as I route out a rectangular section in the back of this. Then I'll fill that with a piece of plywood, eliminating a lot of the space where epoxy resin would need to have gone. So you can see this piece of plywood is now filling in a lot of the areas where resin would have been. It also has helped me flatten this blank. It had a little bow in it, so that's great, but it has a machined edge that's going to look out of place if we see it through the resin. So I'm going to shape this just a little bit. The colored resin might have hidden these pieces anyway, but better safe than sorry. Oh, and yeah, now it's time for some serious sanding. Before I can make the mold, I need to square up the rectangular shape of the board on my table saw. To create the rectangular mold, I needed to build a form to shape the poured epoxy resin. I prefer melamine for this task, and in addition to siliconing the joints, I apply a serious layer of wax to the completed form to help keep the epoxy from bonding to its surface. That would mean a lot of extra work. One of the challenges with working with epoxy is that it can flow places you don't expect it, which is why I work so hard to get the joints tight on this mold. When I got all done, I looked at the corners and they didn't seem like they were really tight enough for me, so I added these clamps. I also screwed up from the bottom to suck this thing down. We're about ready to start pouring. To determine how much total epoxy resin you'll need to fill these voids, we'll need to do a little bit of math. This TimberCast epoxy is sold in milliliters or liters. The way to calculate the total amount is by estimating the cubic inches of each void by multiplying the length, width, and depth of the openings. To find the total number of liters you will need, multiply the cubic inches by 0.016387. It's as simple as that. Of course, there is a fudge factor in that most voids won't be rectangular with square sides, so adjust your estimates accordingly. One final comment, it's better to have ordered too much epoxy than not enough. So, something to consider before you pour epoxy resin. This TimberCast product is designed to be able to be poured in a deep pour like we're about to do, a couple inches thick. Most resins can't be done that way and can't really be poured deeper than a ½ inch or a ¼ of an inch, which is why we've selected the TimberCast. But there are limits. Too much, and the thermal mass will foam or crack. Not enough, and it won't cure. It's just something to keep in mind. Now it's time to get busy. Mix the components together thoroughly. That's important. One very important note, you need to level this mold perfectly to keep the resin from flowing where you don't want it. This is where all your preparations come to the test. Here's hoping for success. I'm going to do this pour in different sections, but they may leak over to one another. We'll see. Allow the resin to cure overnight. Well, it's been about 24 hours, and as sometimes happens, I've had some successes and some complications. The large voids where I was filling it in with epoxy, They look great, and they've cured really well. They're hard as a rock. The narrow cracks have yet to cure completely and need more time. And I'm sure you noticed that my table got a little bored last night and started blowing bubbles. One more point. With a board that is as fractured as this, with all these cracks and nooks and crannies, you're going to have to pay attention to it for at least 8 hours as the epoxy is curing. The epoxy will continue to soak into cracks and crevices in the wood, and you need to continue to fill up the voids so that you keep them even at the final cure. Now, I need to get ready to do a little bit of sanding. Okay, a lot of sanding. All right, we're getting there. It's time for the big reveal. As you can see, there was a little bit of leakage. Why you have that cardboard there. Now we're going to see if we can break it loose from the form. I'm sure it'll go fine. That piece came apart. Well, it looks like I'm going to need to do a little sanding, but in general, I think it's been successful. We'll come back in just a few seconds. Status report. I have to say that removing it from the frame, from the mold, is a lot more work than I thought, but don't worry, it's going to look great when I'm done. So after I got this blank out of the melamine mold, which was a lot more work than I thought it would be, do not skimp on the wax. Now I've sanded it. I'm going to have to do a little bit more sanding. I'm going to put on a finish and then put some legs on it, and then this dramatic looking coffee table will be completed. So that's it. I found this timber cast epoxy really easy to use, and its deep pour capabilities were so important to this project. And as you can see, the color couldn't be more dramatic. I'm Rob Johnstone from Woodworker's Journal. I hope you enjoyed the video today. Keep on making sawdust.